I was laughed out of the room. My so-called family didn't just doubt me, they destroyed me. When my startup collapsed, they acted like I was just some kid playing businessman. My cousins called me a joke. My uncle told me I was a disgrace to our name. And my father? He didn't even look me in the eye that night. He just stood there, silent. Like I wasn't even his son. For a while, I believed them. I hit rock bottom, broke, alone, and haunted by the image of their smug faces at that dinner table. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't done. Not even close. I disappeared from their world for 5 years. No calls. No family holidays. Nothing. I worked in the shadows, built something new, quietly, obsessively. While they drank champagne at shareholder meetings, I was rebuilding from the ashes, piece by painful piece. And then, on my father's 60th birthday, I walked through the front doors of the company they all thought I'd never touch again, with papers in hand. Trust me, they never saw it coming. You want to know how a broke failure turned the tables on an entire family empire, and made them watch as everything they stood on crumbled beneath them? Good. Because it all started with one name, mine. My name echoed in the marble lobby, bouncing off the pristine walls they'd built with the profits from deals I wasn't smart enough to close. The receptionist, a woman who'd probably witnessed 1,000 power plays in this very spot, looked up. Her practiced smile faltered. She knew me. Everyone knew me. Or rather, they knew the version of me they'd gleefully written off years ago. Mr. Hayes, she stammered, her eyes darting to the security guard by the elevators. He too recognized me. A flicker of something, pity, maybe, crossed his face before hardening into professional indifference. "I'm here to see my father," I said, my voice steady, holding the manila envelope a little tighter. The weight of it, the weight of the past 5 years, settled in my gut. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" The receptionist's voice was tight, strained. She knew I didn't. Everyone knew I hadn't spoken to my father in years. "It's a surprise," I replied, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. I could practically taste the irony. Surprise was an understatement. This was a goddamn earthquake. I bypassed the desk, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The security guard shifted, his hand hovering near his radio, but he didn't stop me. He knew, just like everyone else, that I was family. That was the problem, wasn't it? They thought family meant they could get away with anything. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an eternity. Each ping of the passing floors was a hammer blow against the wall of composure I'd so carefully constructed. I closed my eyes, picturing their faces. My father's cold indifference. My uncle's sneering condescension. My cousin's open mockery. I let the memory fuel me, a burning ember in the pit of my stomach. The doors opened onto a panorama of the city, a glittering tapestry of steel and glass stretching out beneath the afternoon sun. My father's office, a monument to his ego, dominated the space. The door was closed. Of course it was. He was probably inside, plotting his next conquest, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive leather and old money filling my lungs. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of everything I'd lost, everything I'd clawed my way back to reclaim. I knocked. Once. Twice. The sound was sharp, insistent, a crack in the facade of their perfect world. A muffled voice called out, "Come in." I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, like an old man complaining about being disturbed. My father sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his back to the window, the city lights forming a halo around his silhouette. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair more silver than gray. But the arrogance, the unshakable belief in his own invincibility, was still there. He didn't turn around. He just kept staring out at the city, like it belonged to him. Like I didn't even exist. "What is it, Margaret?" he asked, his voice sharp, impatient. Margaret was his secretary, a woman who'd probably seen more of him than his own children. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the sudden silence. He finally turned, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, just a flicker of a second, I saw a flash of recognition. Then, it was gone, replaced by a mask of confusion. "Daniel," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. It wasn't the warm, paternal tone I remembered from childhood. It was the voice he used for strangers, for people he considered beneath him. "Surprise," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. I placed the manila envelope on his desk, the sound heavy, final. He stared at it, then back at me, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" "A gift," I replied, my smile widening, the ember in my stomach now a raging fire. "Happy birthday, Dad." He reached for the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. He opened it, pulled out the papers, and began to read. The color drained from his face, his eyes widening in horror. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You can't," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Oh, but I can," I said, my voice rising, the years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. And I did. The papers in his hand detailed the meticulously crafted plan I'd spent the last 5 years building. The plan that would strip him, and the rest of my family, of everything they held dear. The plan that would make them pay for every ounce of pain they'd inflicted on me. The plan that started with my name, and ended with theirs erased from the company they thought they owned. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hatred. He finally understood. The game had changed. And I was the one holding all the cards. The party downstairs was in full swing. I could hear the muffled music, the clinking of champagne glasses, the forced laughter of my relatives. They were celebrating his 60 years of reign. They had no idea that their world was about to come crashing down. And I, the failure, the joke, the disgrace, was about to deliver the final blow. He finally found his voice, a choked rasp. What do you want?" The question hung in the air, thick with the unspoken accusations of the past. I wanted a lot of things. I wanted the years back, the opportunities stolen, the respect I deserved. But most of all, I wanted them to feel the same gut-wrenching fear that had been my constant companion for so long. "I want what's mine," I said, my voice cold, hard. "I want this company." He laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "You run this company? You couldn't even keep your own little venture afloat." "That's where you're wrong," I replied, leaning closer, my eyes boring into his. "My little venture was a strategic retreat. A way to learn, to adapt, to build something stronger, something untouchable." I tapped the manila envelope. "And this is the culmination of all that work." The papers detailed not just my ownership of a controlling stake in the company, acquired through a series of complex, perfectly legal maneuvers they'd been too blinded by their own arrogance to notice, but also evidence of their shady dealings, their unethical practices, the carefully buried secrets that would bring their empire crumbling down. I'd played the long game, and I'd played it flawlessly. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He knew. He knew I had him. He looked out the window, at the city lights that no longer seemed to belong to him. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint sounds of the party below. "How?" he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's just say I learned from the best," I replied, a flicker of a smile playing on my lips. He'd taught me everything I knew about business, about ruthlessness, about survival. He just hadn't realized he'd created his own worst enemy. "You're going to destroy everything," he said, his voice laced with a strange mix of fear and resignation. "No," I corrected him, my voice steady, unwavering. "I'm going to rebuild it. Better. Stronger. Without you." I turned to leave, the weight of the past 5 years lifting from my shoulders. I paused at the door, looking back at him, his silhouette framed by the city lights. "Oh, and Dad," I said, my voice laced with a hint of something he'd never heard from me before, pity. "Enjoy the party." The elevator ride down felt different. Lighter. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet satisfaction. I stepped out into the lobby, the receptionist's eyes widening in surprise. The security guard straightened, his hand instinctively moving towards his radio. But I just smiled, a genuine smile this time, and walked towards the ballroom. The music was louder here, the laughter more boisterous. I saw them all, gathered around a massive cake, their faces flushed with champagne and self-congratulation. My uncle, his arm around my father, was regaling the crowd with some exaggerated story of their latest business triumph. My cousins, their eyes gleaming with avarice, were discussing their plans for the company's future, their future. I walked towards them, the crowd parting as I approached. The music seemed to fade, the laughter dying down, replaced by a nervous murmur. They all knew something was wrong. They could feel it in the air, like a sudden drop in pressure before a storm. My father saw me, his face paling beneath his carefully cultivated tan. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My uncle stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing, his smile faltering. My cousins, their faces contorted in confusion, stared at me like I was a ghost. I reached the table, the cake a monument to their decadence, their obliviousness. I picked up a knife, the silver gleaming in the light. I looked at my father, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pleading. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, my voice loud enough to carry over the sudden silence. And then, I plunged the knife into the cake, slicing through the elaborate frosting, the layers of decadent sponge, the very symbol of their opulent, undeserved success. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and whispers. They watched, horrified, as I took a piece of the cake, smeared it on my fingers, and then, ate it. "This," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "is just the beginning." Over the next few weeks, I systematically dismantled their world. I exposed their corruption, their greed, their lies. I fired my uncle, my cousins, and every single person who had ever looked down on me, who had ever doubted me, who had ever laughed at my expense. I restructured the company, rebuilt it from the ground up, based on principles of integrity and innovation. I turned their crumbling empire into a force for good, a company that actually cared about its employees, its customers, its impact on the world. My father, stripped of his power, his legacy tarnished, retreated into a quiet, bitter retirement. He never spoke to me again. But I didn't need his approval. I didn't need any of their approval. I had something far more valuable. I had my self-respect. I had my purpose. I had built something of my own, something they could never take away from me. And as I stood in my new office, overlooking the city that now felt like it truly belonged to me, I realized that their mockery, their rejection, their cruelty, it had been my greatest gift. It had fueled my ambition, sharpened my focus, and ultimately, led me to where I was meant to be. I had risen from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. And that, I knew, was the sweetest revenge of all. The silence that followed my symbolic act of defiance was deafening. It stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the frantic whispers that rippled through the room. My father's face, a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, was a sight I would treasure forever. His carefully constructed world, his legacy of power and prestige, was crumbling around him, and I, his discarded son, was the architect of his destruction. The whispers turned to accusations, the accusations to outright panic. My uncle, his face red with rage, lunged towards me, but I sidestepped him with ease. He'd always been more bark than bite. My cousins, their faces pale and drawn, looked on in stunned silence. The party guests, once so eager to bask in the reflected glory of my family's success, now scrambled to distance themselves, their smiles replaced by expressions of unease and apprehension. I let the chaos unfold, a symphony of their own making. I watched as the carefully orchestrated celebration descended into a chaotic free-for-all, a fitting end to their reign of arrogance and deceit. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The look on their faces, the fear in their eyes, was all the satisfaction I needed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I moved quickly, decisively, dismantling their empire piece by piece. The evidence I'd gathered, meticulously compiled over years of patient observation and strategic planning, was irrefutable. The authorities, alerted to their shady dealings, launched a full-scale investigation. The media, always hungry for a scandal, had a field day. The company's stock plummeted. Their reputation, once their greatest asset, was now their biggest liability. My father, stripped of his title and his fortune, retreated to a secluded estate, a shadow of his former self. He never contacted me, never apologized, never acknowledged the pain he'd caused. But I didn't expect him to. His silence was a testament to his pride, his inability to admit defeat. My uncle and cousins, their lavish lifestyles gone, their futures uncertain, disappeared from the public eye. I heard whispers of their desperate attempts to salvage what they could, but their efforts were futile. The damage was done. Their empire was gone. I rebuilt the company from the ground up, purging it of the corruption and greed that had festered for so long. I implemented ethical business practices, fostered a culture of transparency and accountability, and prioritized the well-being of my employees. I transformed the company into a force for good, a reflection of the values I believed in. The city, once a symbol of my family's dominance, now felt like my own. I walked its streets with a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. The people who had once mocked me, who had dismissed me as a failure, now looked at me with respect, with admiration. I had earned my place, not through inheritance or privilege, but through hard work, determination, and an unwavering commitment to my vision. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I found myself standing on the rooftop of the company building, overlooking the city lights. The air was crisp, the sky clear. The city, a tapestry of light and shadow, stretched out before me, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of transformation. I thought of my father, alone in his self-imposed exile. I felt a pang of sadness, a flicker of empathy. He had taught me many things, both good and bad. He had shown me the intoxicating allure of power, the seductive nature of ambition. But he had also shown me the destructive consequences of greed, the corrosive effects of pride. He had been my greatest teacher, and my greatest adversary. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. The past was gone. The future was unwritten. I had faced my demons, conquered my fears, and emerged victorious. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and forged them into something stronger, something more meaningful. I had found my purpose, not in revenge, but in redemption. And as I stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, I knew that I had finally found my way home. The city glittered beneath me, a million tiny stories unfolding in the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The anger, the resentment, the burning need for revenge, it had all faded away, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. I hadn't just taken back what was mine, I had created something new, something better. I had built a legacy, not of power and greed, but of integrity and compassion. And that, I realized, was a victory far sweeter than any revenge could ever be. I learned a valuable lesson through all of this. Sometimes, the greatest opportunities arise from our deepest wounds. The pain of my past, the mockery I endured, it had all fueled my determination, pushing me to achieve something far greater than I could have ever imagined. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope, always a chance to rise above, to rebuild, to redefine ourselves. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply living well, and building a life that makes those who doubted you regret every single word they ever said. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We delve into the depths of human emotion, exploring the complexities of ambition, revenge, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Join our community of listeners who appreciate these immersive narratives, and let's explore the shadows and triumphs of the human experience together. Like this video and let me know in the comments what you think about Daniel's journey. What would you have done in his situation? I look forward to hearing your thoughts.